Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Kadavi, and I'm the president of the Iranian American Jewish Federation of New York. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this Iajf event with Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Tonight's event is titled Anti-Semitism in a Time of Global Crisis. This is one in a series of virtual events we have put on since the COVID-19 outbreak. And please save the date. For 1 week from tonight, on June 23rd, we'll be presenting a phenomenal program titled An Evening with Real Estate Experts, featuring a star-studded panel. You'll see an invitation for that event very shortly. Briefly, the mission of the Iajf is to celebrate the accomplishments of the Iranian Jewish community and to invest resources to support those in need, both in Israel and the United States, and to safeguard Zionist ideals. We are also cultivating the next generation of leaders through our Young Leadership Division. Iajf is proud to have partnered with ADL for many years, working together to combat anti-Semitism, particularly on college campuses and universities, a partnership that has only grown stronger with the appointment of Jonathan Greenblatt, the current CEO and National Director of ADL. As Chief Executive, Jonathan leads all aspects of ADL, which is the world's leading anti-hate organization. Prior to joining ADL, Jonathan served in the White House as Special Assistant to President Barack Obama and Director of the Office of Social Innovation. I could literally spend the next hour detailing his many accomplishments in the business and nonprofit worlds, so I'd refer you to the Iajf website to learn more about Jonathan. Jonathan, it's wonderful to have you with us tonight, and I thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to address us.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I want to start out by congratulating you as the new president of Iajf, and you walk you stand on the shoulders of Robert Kahane and Shahram and all those who came before you, and it really is a tremendous organization, and I'm deeply proud of the partnership with Iajf New York. I'm deeply proud of the work we've done with the Iranian American Jewish community, and really, thankful to be here this evening. So I appreciate the opportunity. If I might, what I'd love to do is to share a bit of to have a conversation with you and with everyone on the webinar tonight about anti-Semitism in a time of global crisis. So I'll share my screen, Stephen.
Yep, no, that's great. And for the audience, if you want to submit questions for Jonathan, please use either the Q&A feature or the chat feature at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can after Jonathan's presentation.
Great. So I'm going to go fast, Stephen, to leave lots of time for Q&A.
Great.
So first, we'll talk briefly about what anti-Semitism is. We'll talk about some of the myths behind it, where we are today in this time of crisis, and then how ADL responds. I just want to note, when I talk about what anti-Semitism is, I'm going to share with you some of the ways that we think about this problem, but I don't think there's a community in America that better understands the threat of anti-Semitism than the Iranian American community. Whether you were born in Iran or you were born here, yours is one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world, and one that literally faced down some of the most significant anti-Semitic threats we've seen in the 20th century with the Islamic Revolution. And Iran continues to be the largest state sponsor of anti-Semitism, the largest state sponsor of terror, the largest state sponsor of hate on the planet Earth. And that so many of you lived through the tumult of the revolution, that so many of you lived steeped in Persian culture. You are more in Shia theology. You are more familiar with this than almost any other audience I might ever speak to. So I know while I'll share tonight, there's lots that I could stand and ADL could stand to learn from you. So let's talk about anti-Semitism and what it is and define it, because it comes in many forms. Sometimes it masquerades as anti-Zionism. Sometimes it shows up as white supremacists on your doorstep. But all of it is a threat to us as a Jewish people. So there are definitions that are out there. This one comes from a group called the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. It's a definition that actually President Trump adopted as U.S. policy just a few months ago. It was a brilliant, smart move, because anti-Semitism is a real threat. And there may be some on the extreme right and some on the radical left who try to deny it. There may be some in foreign governments who try to explain it away. but it is a clear and present danger for us as Jews. And it's about a perception of Jews that can be manifest through rhetoric or through action, targeting individuals, targeting institutions, targeting facilities, targeting even the Jewish state. But it's about hatred of us as Jews because we are Jews. And unfortunately, it isn't new. There are a number of common myths that have been around for ages and ages and ages. One of the myths is of excessive Jewish power. The accusations that somehow people like George Soros or the Rothschild family are manipulating world events, are manipulating America to pursue Israel or the Jewish agenda. You see this cartoon on the screen, it's quite diabolical because on the screen, George Soros is manipulating David Petraeus, highly decorated general from the U.S. Army who formerly served in Afghanistan under Barack Obama. And next to him, H.R. McMaster, highly decorated Marine who served as security advisor to President Trump. And the point here is that the Jews manipulate Democrats and Republicans. And if you can see in this picture, at the top of the screen are the Rothschilds, right? So George Soros isn't even the real power. But the idea of Jews as an octopus enveloping the world, the idea that the Jews are behind communism and capitalism. These are age-old myths that have been perpetrated against the Jewish people for thousands of years, as are the myths of Jewish greed. Now, whether these are cartoons that are pushed out again by Arab states, like this one in the middle that you can see, or they're used to murder Jews, like Ilan Halimi, a young Moroccan Frenchman, who was kidnapped and murdered by a band of radical Islamists in France it's almost 15 years ago, because they believed this young middle-class boy was rich because he was Jewish. Or the age-old propaganda from Europe that makes this claim. Mind you, the reason why they believe Jews are greedy is because thousands of years ago, when the church and the mosque wouldn't allow Christians or Muslims to lend money, they forced Jews to do it. They forced Jews into the role of moneylender. And then they scapegoated and accused the Jews of only caring about money. Disgusting. Or the blood libel. This is an age-old claim that somehow the Jews are trying to kill non-Jewish babies or murder whole non-Jewish populations. And this goes back thousands of years as well to an idea that was first propagated in medieval England, that the Jews would murder Christian babies and use their blood to make matzah. Or that the Black Plague that swept through Europe in the 1400s, was also the result of Jewish plotting. Or we saw this happen in the Middle East as well, in places like Syria, where Jews were accused again of murdering Muslim babies. Or denialism. This really comes to a sharp point around Holocaust denialism. This idea that the Jews invented the Holocaust or somehow exaggerated the Holocaust for our own gain, which is so disgusting it almost doesn't bear mention. And then finally, the myth of delegitimization. This is the idea that some of the Jews are not legitimate. And whether it's them saying the Jews are not legitimate as a people or the Jewish state is not legitimate as a country, we need to recognize that delegitimization is a form of anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism, the denial of the Jewish people to a homeland, is anti-Semitism. And so it shows up in different ways, but delegitimizing the Jewish people has been going on for thousands of years. So we need to recognize what anti-Zionism really is today, a tired effort to scapegoat and stereotype Jews. So what's happening now in our current moment? Well, first of all, we've got to acknowledge this is unlike any time any of us have lived through. Literally. There's not a person on the webinar today who's ever experienced this. Number one, global pandemic. COVID-19 has swept through countries. It's devastated populations. It's shut down our economy. And look, to date, more than 100,000 Americans have been killed. More than 2 million have been infected by the disease. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of businesses have been closed. Millions of jobs have been lost. Trillions of dollars has been spent by the government, but far more trillions will ultimately be gone. I mean, the economic impact, the health impact is devastating. Secondly, the recent killing of George Floyd. Now, look, it doesn't really matter to me if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I don't really care. I truly don't. But the murder of George Floyd by a policeman in broad daylight has exposed these fissures of systemic racism, which have been here as persistent problems for hundreds of years in America. And all the data tells us that it's real. All the data about everything from traffic stops to arrest records to sentencing to whatnot, like African Americans experience a kind of racism in the justice system that's unlike any other community in our country. And then thirdly, political polarization. Look, I'm sure there are people on this webinar right now who have family members who aren't talking to each other because this one likes Trump and this one likes Biden, right? I'm sure there are friends of yours you no longer want to have dinner with or play Taktanar with because all they want to do is talk about Hannity or Maddow or whatnot. The political polarization in this country is extraordinary, and it is fueling anger and dissent. It's very destructive. So against this backdrop, let's talk about where we are today. Well, anti-Semitic incidents in America have been going down for about 15 years, since 2001. And then in 2016, something changed. In 2016, the number went up 34%. And that was all weighted around the presidential campaign and election. And the data doesn't lie. The weighting of the events in the second half of the year when the general campaign really took off, after candidate Trump got the nomination, was real. And the anti-Semitism that surged during the campaign was real. And it primarily came from the extremists who felt emboldened to see their memes and their rhetoric showing up literally in the campaign commercials of candidate Trump at the time. And then 2017, the number actually surged 57%, the biggest single spike ADL's ever tracked in 40 years of doing this work. And it went up across the board, but that was the year that brought us Charlottesville, this public rally where people felt empowered, neo-Nazis, to march openly in the broad daylight. And of course, a young girl was murdered on Saturday of that weekend. She was run over in a car driven by a white supremacist. Then in 2018, the number dipped some 5%, but actually assaults increased more than doubled year over year. In 2019, featured the Tree of Life attack, the most violent anti-Semitic attack in American history. 11 people murdered in a mass shooting event by an avowed white supremacist. So the death toll, unfortunately, reached a high in 2018 we had never seen before in America. So we thought 2019, it's got to get better. How could it be worse? Well, in 2019, that was the highest total of anti-Semitic incidents the ADL has ever tracked. More anti-Semitic acts happened in 2019 than in any of the past 40 years. And it featured some of the most violent attacks on Jews, again, ever seen in the history of the country. The shooting in April of 2019, the mass shooting by a white supremacist at a Chabad synagogue outside of San Diego, where 2 people were killed. The shooting at a kosher supermarket in Jersey City, New Jersey last December, where 3 people were killed. That was committed by a black Hebrew Israelite, a radicalized person who belonged to a weirdo religious sect. And then, later that month, there was the stabbing attack at someone's home in Muncie, New York, not too far from here in Rockland County, where a rabbi was stabbed, left in a coma, died a few months later. And then finally Brooklyn, where there was a pattern and a rhythm of assault that took place day after day after day after day after day after day after day, where the mayor couldn't seem to tie his shoes straight and do anything about it. Only after Governor Cuomo intervened did we get more police on the street and some action. So if anyone tells you that the anti-Semitism is exaggerated, they're wrong. The data doesn't lie. It is real. And the incidents don't lie. The death toll is real. Now, by the way, so what caused these events? Well, let me just make a point here. The shooting in Poway, that was a white supremacist, a right-wing extremist. The shooting in Jersey City, that was a Black Hebrew Israelite, sort of a radical leftist. And there was no one wearing MAGA hats in Brooklyn or in Muncie. So you can't just say, oh, it's all President Trump's fault. And you can't just say, oh, it's all the anti-Israel crowd, the BDS crowd. Look, all of it is a threat to us. And let me tell you something. I paid respect in Poway. I paid respect in Jersey City. I paid respect in Muncie. I have gone to enough Shiva calls that I never want to do it again. And I've sat with Governor Cuomo and Governor Newsom in California and the mayor, God bless him, and the mayor of Pittsburgh and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Jared Kushner, and none of them have answers for us. We have got to take care of ourselves. We've got to work with the authorities wherever we can, but don't think this elected official or that candidate will save you. We can only save ourselves. So what's happening now? Well, since COVID-19, the issues have not gotten any better. The good news is that there have been less actual physical incidents because everybody's been shut in their homes. But now we see Jews accused of starting the virus. This is literally a thing that people believe that's been spread by white supremacists, that Jews are starting this. There have been accusations that Jews are uniquely spreading the virus. Many of you might remember that really ugly Barry Weiss article in the New York Times months ago about GreatNet that seemed to somehow suggest that Iranian Jews were going to be spreading the virus. Or the stories out of the AIPAC conference that many of us attended. And many in the Orthodox community, we know they haven't all behaved by the social distancing guidelines, but I think it's fair to say it's happened in all communities. And then finally, the accusations that Jews are somehow profiting from the virus. This is ugly. But that Jews who are trying to develop a vaccine are only doing it for our own financial gain. But let me tell you, power, blood libel, greed, do these myths sound familiar? This is literally what I was just telling you about a few minutes ago. And in this moment where I mentioned we're dealing with the death of George Floyd, and there's a lot of attention on Black Lives Matter, let me say clearly, Black Lives Matter. People should not be dehumanized and suffocated under the knee of a police officer in broad daylight. That is not right. There is no world in which that should be excused. And yet, even as we stand up against racism, we also need to recognize that there are issues with anti-Semitism in the movement for Black lives. Whether it's people who would somehow do this intersectionality thing and somehow conflate Israel with, Black Lives Matter, or these baseless, fictitious lies that the IDF has somehow trained American police to kill protesters, or the claims by some celebrities. We've seen people like Chelsea Handler, who's not exactly in line for a Nobel Prize, tweet about Louis Farrakhan in recent days, or rapper Ice Cube. It's also pretty ugly. making claims about Jewish conspiracies. All of this needs to be called out. Now, for those who are interested, ADL has done this in the past. You can write down the link that you see at the top of your screen. Maybe Steve and someone can even put it in the chat. So I've written about this in the past. We can fight against racism, but that doesn't mean we have to accept anti-Semitism. And we can fight anti-Semitism, that doesn't mean we should tolerate racism. So we can talk about that more in the Q&A if you want, but anyone can read what I've written about this a few years ago when the Black Lives Matter movement really took off. Now, ADL, how do we work? Why are we even here? Well, ADL was founded in 1913 around this incident. If you can't make out what you're seeing on the screen, that's Leo Frank, a young Jewish man from New York who went down to the South, went down to Georgia to manage his family's business, was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, was lynched and hung from a tree. You're looking at Leo Frank's body. How do we have this picture? Because after they hung Leo Frank, they took photographs and gave them out as postcards and souvenirs. And this was at a time when Jews were discriminated against systematically, if you will. You couldn't work in many professions. You couldn't live in many neighborhoods. We couldn't get health care at many institutions. Our children couldn't attend universities. And in that moment, when Leo Frank was lynched, in that time, ADL was formed. And the founders who created ADL, they wrote a long manifesto. They called it a charter. And in that document are the words we still use today, 100 years later, as our mission. And they're simple: to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. And let's just pause here for a moment, Stephen, for everyone to note. 100 years ago, the Jewish community of America didn't have the political power of the Iranian Jewish community of Great Neck. 100 years ago, the Jews of America didn't have the economic wherewithal of the Iranian Jews in Great Neck. 100 years ago, Jews didn't have social standing. We didn't have cultural capital. We were very discriminated against. And so it made sense to start an organization that would fight anti-Semitism. But we also said we will fight anti-Semitism and we will fight for others. The genius of the founders of ADL was that they realized that Jews in America would never be safe until all people were safe. Jews wouldn't have justice until we all had justice. Frankly, that's a very Jewish idea. That's evoking Hillel. But so when I stand up against racism, when we stand up for Asians experiencing racism, for Black people experiencing racism, we do it because our mission at ADL compels us to do this. Again, we will not stand for anti-Semitism, and I will call it out every time I see it. But I won't stand idly by in the face of racism. ADL won't, and I would encourage you not to do it. Now, how do we get our work done? Well, first, we do incident response. We have 25 offices across the United States that are the first line of defense when there's an incident. When your home gets vandalized, when the synagogue gets defaced, when a Jewish child gets bullied at school, well, the first call they made after the shooting in Poway was to ADL. This is what we do. When there's a BDS campaign on a college campus, there's an anti-Zionist rally, this is what we do. Secondly, we do advocacy. I'm testifying in Congress. My staff across the country are engaging elected officials. We pick up the phone and they answer. And we hold them accountable, not just elected officials in Washington, but executives at the biggest companies in Silicon Valley. Tomorrow, we're launching a campaign on Facebook that you'll read about in the Wall Street Journal. We hold truth to power, and they listen. Thirdly, we do education, because you can't just lobby your way against hate. You have to change hearts and minds. So we're one of the largest providers in the United States of anti-bias education in schools, including here at Great Neck North and Great Neck Middle School. Great Neck North Middle School. And then finally, we work with law enforcement. Yes, we need to explore reforms for law enforcement. Yes, law enforcement shouldn't shoot unarmed, black men in the back. But we need the police on our side. We need to work with the police to make them better. And almost all of the police are good people who defend us every day. And if we want to protect ourselves against, again, violent left-wing radicals, against violent right-wing extremists, against violent Islamist, radical jihadists, we need law enforcement on our side. That's why ADL has been working with law enforcement literally for 80 years. And we're not going to stop. All right, so why don't I pause there, Stephen, and we can open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. It's a lot of information, some of it very alarming, but I think we can take comfort knowing that ADL has our back and that you're at the helm of the ADL. So I've been monitoring the questions while you were speaking, and I know the title of this evening is Anti-Semitism in the Global Crisis, but a number of the questions have come in regarding George Floyd, which you referenced, and his horrific murder. I don't think it's no surprise that our community supports the movement, but there have been a number of questions about Black Lives Matter, Jonathan, and a historic, at least, anti-Israel and anti-Semitic platform. So can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Sure. So I'll say up front to read the article that I shared. If that hasn't been shared with the chat, Stephen, maybe someone can make sure that that happens, because I think that will be very helpful to people who want to try to understand that. And in fact, I'll just do that now while we're talking. So look, Black Lives Matter, this is how I would say. So number one, we should not stand for anti-Semitism wherever and whenever it happens. Period, end of story. We need to call it out whenever and wherever it happens, okay? It's intolerable. And indeed, but let's also make sure we understand Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is like a cause. It is a movement. Black Lives Matter is not an organization. You can't go visit the office of Black Lives Matter and sit in the lobby. You can't send them a letter. You can't go look at their board because they're not an organization. It's a movement. It's a cause. Yes, several people started it, but it lives online. And there are lots of individuals and organizations who say Black Lives Matter. Now, we at ADL don't use the Black Lives Matter hashtag. We don't use it. And I'll explain why in a minute. But it's a cause. It's a movement. It's a phenomenon. It's not a place. It's not a person. It's not a thing. But in 2016, a group of people involved in the movement got together and said, we're going to release a platform of our ideas around the 2016 campaign. And they released a platform. It was about 40,000 words long, mostly about criminal justice reform. But in it, there was a section on Israel, 800 words, that was depraved and anti-Semitic and venomous. It said, Israel's a genocidal state, we support BDS, blah, blah, blah. It was off-the-wall bananas. So what did we do? We called it out clearly and consistently, again and again. That's why I wrote that article that's now in the chat. But the fact of the matter is that many of the organizations who were involved in the big, broad movement weren't part of that platform. It was a subset, not everybody. And you know what? Look, you could liken it to, if you want to draw a parallel, the movement to free Soviet Jews in the United States. That was a cause. That was a movement. That was a phenomenon to free Soviet Jews. And many individuals and organizations were involved. You couldn't, again, go sit in the lobby of free Soviet Jews. There were lots of groups involved, like ADL, like UJA, and many, many others. And some of the individuals who were involved in that movement were bad news, like the JDL, which sent pipe bombs to people and was arrested by the FBI. But just because there were some bad apples doesn't mean the movement wasn't important. I think this is similar. Now, one thing that's different, is there are a number of prominent African-American activists who have openly embraced the Palestinian cause and pushed out a highly toxic narrative on Israel. Angela Davis, Michelle Alexander, Mark Lamont Hill, of course, people like Louis Farrakhan. So what do we have to do? We have to call them out every time. But you can support civil rights and you can support better treatment for African Americans and not be anti-Semitic. I'm proud to work with the NAACP. I'm proud to work with the National Urban League. I'm proud to work with many of these organizations who do not believe in anti-Semitism and don't use it. So the bottom line is that if we think it's wrong that anti-Semites have penetrated this movement, we've got to kick them out. And you don't kick them out by sitting on the sidelines. You don't get them off the field by saying, you know what, I don't feel like playing today. We have to roll up our sleeves and get in there and fight. We have to change it to create the outcome that we want. So again, I'm not saying we should lie down with the anti-Semites, but I am saying we should buckle up and get in the fight. That's how you win.
Got it. Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. We've also had a number of questions about the upcoming U.S. elections in November, Jonathan. And without getting...
Is there an election?
Without getting political, is there a way to bring our country together? Or is the political system so polarized and fraught with hatred that it's naive to think that we can go back to the days when you could be on opposite sides of the political spectrum and be respectful and stick to facts?
Well, look, I sometimes get portrayed in the media or on Twitter as being some highly political person because I worked for President Obama, but I did economic policy. I didn't do Middle East policy or anything like that. And most of my life's been in business. I'm much more effective at reading a balance sheet than I am reading a political poll. But I don't think it has to be this way. I do believe that the country can come together. We have in the past. We did after 9/11. But to come together, we need leaders who lead. To come together, we need elected officials who set an example and bring people together. So I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. We're a 501c3 organization. I don't really care who you vote for. I care what you value. And I will say this. Authoritarianism, militarism, paranoia, these are the enemies of the Jewish people. We need leaders who lead by example, who uphold values and come back to it again and again. That's the only way we'll come together. At the same time, Stephen, I told you before, I don't think we can wait. Like, I'm not waiting for Mayor de Blasio to help the Jewish people, for God's sakes. And I would encourage none of you to wait. So we can together build bridges ourselves. And we have to do that at the grassroots level, in our synagogues and shuls and our community centers. We have to find ways to work together. Look, if we wait for Donald Trump or AOC to unite us, we lose. Do you think the squad is going to bring this country together? Give me a break. We need a sane center. We need a grounded, balanced, fact-based group of people, and we can all lead in that example. When you see something anti-Semitic, speak up. Don't send around, your mother-in-law's neighbor's weirdo chain emails. Don't tweet out those weird memes on Facebook. And turn off cable news. We'll all be better off.
And I know ADL has got a ton of great content on a lot of these topics and has helped educate, from elementary school kids up to adults. Another question came in on the chat going back to the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And, you talked about being strong and kicking out the nefarious wings of these movements. Do you have any actual real life steps that people can take? Because, for example, there was a march here in Great Neck last weekend, and a lot of people wanted to attend, but were afraid that the the movement had gotten hijacked by, that wing of the movement that you talked about earlier?
Well, it's a good question. So I wasn't here when, I don't know where we were. I wasn't around. So I don't know about how that played out in Great Neck. But I will tell you this, like I would have shown up with my pro-Israel signs at that rally. I would have said, Black Lives Matter and Jewish and proud. Why should we let the anti-Semites win? Why should we surrender the moral high ground to them? Why should we give up what we know is right? Are we afraid of them? I'm not afraid. Do we think they have better arguments? I don't believe that, not for a second. So my firm belief is we need to show up. And we need to show up and we need to be strong. Let me tell you something. The civil rights movement in this country in the 50s and 60s, the only white people who showed up again and again for African Americans were the Jews. Now, it's true that some African Americans at the time may have had ideas we didn't agree with, that we didn't like, bad ideas about Israel. But Martin Luther King stood up for Zionism because Jews stood up for him. So again, I would just say this. We can't let a few bad apples spoil the bunch. We can't write off this social movement because we don't like the views of a minority of people. I'm proud, and I'll give you one example, Stephen, of where this happened. Look at the Women's March. The Women's March, January 2017, this gigantic political demonstration, 4.2 million people. But guess what? There were four chairs of it. One of them was this woman, Linda Sarsour, who's a rabid anti-Semite, incorrigible. And a second woman named Tamika Mallory, who the ADL then exposed as a follower and fan of Louis Farrakhan. What do I mean we exposed? We literally, my people who have the distinction of tracking anti-Semites, that's what they do for a living, not a job you want, but that's what we do. We track Nazis and the Nation of Islam. And we found at one of his big speeches, Tamika Mallory was literally sitting on the stage right behind Minister Farrakhan. So we called her out. And we highlighted what she said on social media and what Linda Sarsour said. And that literally got the ball rolling that eventually led to those women being ejected from the Women's March leadership. And that led to the election of a new board of chairs, including several Jewish women. Again, you gotta, this is a contact sport. Fighting anti-Semitism ain't gonna happen just here on. You gotta be in it to win it. We do it every single day. And these keyboard warriors, I'm telling you, I think it's pathetic. We gotta show up and fight. So yeah, this demonstration, I wish a contingent from Great Neck had shown up and said Jewish and proud, and yes, Black Lives Matter. That's the picture I want to see in the New York Times.
So we shouldn't be concerned then, Jonathan, for example, with the Women's March showing up and somehow being viewed as endorsing Linda Sarsour by being there. Then you think the greater message outweighs any sort of political tool being used?
Well, I just wouldn't give her the win.
Mm-hmm.
So Stephen, I think this is a good question. This is very important. We have to show up as an ally for those who need help, and as white people or as Persian people, we can be an ally to, let's say, Black people. We can do that. But that doesn't mean we sacrifice our principles. So you've got to show up and fight, but on terms that make sense for you. I would never get into bed with these people. And look, there's a reason why, I kind of take pride in the fact, Stephen, that people on the right don't like me because they think I'm too liberal. People on the left don't like me because they think I'm too conservative. What's the expression? They can all mashimo or something like that. Literally. I don't care what they say, because what I won't do is renounce my principles for somebody else's politics. And so, yeah, I think we have to get in there and fight. I don't think we should allow our enemies to set the terms of the debate. I don't think we should allow our opponents to create the conditions in which we have to argue. I mean, the best defense is a good offense, and we've got to go on offense here. And Stephen, I'll say one other thing that I really feel strongly about. The worst consequence is when Jews are fighting other Jews. When we allow ourselves to be manipulated by those who don't really have our interests in mind. When Jews fight with Jews, remember it's the anti-Semites who win. We should not give them that privilege. So I feel very strongly about this because, you know, as a Jewish people, we are blessed, and we are blessed in this country. But if we want to maintain the privilege that we have, we've got to fight for it. We can't let anyone take it away from us. And no community knows that better than your community. Your community knows what it's like to live in a great country and then to have, you know, outsiders, to have anti-Semites, to have radicals, to have lunatics take it over. You know what it's like to be dispossessed. You know what it's like to be marginalized. We can't allow it to happen here.
No, that's great advice. And that's what I love about the IAJF is that, as you said, you know, most came to this country after the Iranian Revolution and have lived through really one of the worst potential regimes in history, that one that continues to perpetuate these lies and seeks the destruction of the state of Israel. So very alarming.
Yeah, I must tell you, as I said in the beginning, Iran is the single greatest sponsor of anti-Semitism in the world. The stuff we see coming in, they're the ones spewing this propaganda that the Jews created COVID-19.
Right.
But look, I will tell you this. And by the way, they're also the ones saying and trying to propound this idea that anti-Zionism is a legitimate thing. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. There's nothing wrong with criticizing policies of the Israeli government, like there's nothing wrong with criticizing policies of the American government. But only Israel is held out to these double standards. Only Israel is delegitimized this way. And when you deny Jewish people the rights you'd give anybody else, that is anti-Semitism. Whether it shows up on a college campus in the form of BDS rally, whether it shows up in state-sponsored propaganda from the Islamic Republic, whether it shows up at some rally, that's all got to be called out. I mean, at ADL, we are unapologetic and proud Zionists, through and through. And I won't accept when anyone says that. We somehow can't criticize, if you will. It's ridiculous.
I'm glad you mentioned college campuses and the BDS movement, because there are a lot of people on this Zoom that have kids that are, well, that would have been off to college in September. We'll see what happens with COVID-19. And we'll do a separate panel on this topic down the road. But is there any quick advice you can give kids that are about to go out to college? Because I've heard questions from people saying, well, University of Michigan, for example, should I send my kid there? I've heard it's anti-Semitic. So, you know, any quick words of wisdom on that topic?
Yeah, so a few things. So number one, dear God, you should be so blessed that your kid gets into the University of Michigan. If your child gets into Michigan or Tufts or Yale or Stanford or NYU, please send them. It is safe. The idea that somehow there are raging anti-Semites marching around with placards, hurting Jews and Christians, that's just not true. I mean, it isn't true. Please, don't send your child, to Al-Azhar University in Cairo. I would recommend against that. Don't send your child to, the University of Iraq in Baghdad. I would recommend against that. But you can send your child to UCLA or even UC Irvine. Now, does that mean that there isn't a problem on campus? No, I'm not saying that. There is a problem on campus. You've got kind of a radical faculty that gives sustenance to radical, leftist, hateful, anti-Israel elements on campus. That's a fact. And it's a problem. And we need to fight it. But that's what your kids need to do through Hillel. That's what our young people need to do through groups like Stands With Us on campus. That's what our young people need to do through groups like AIPAC on campus. That's what our young people need to do. So it is safe to go to campus, number one. Number two, your kids are not going to be bothered on a day-to-day basis. There's nothing like that at all. But there is a problem in some classes. There is a problem with some clubs. And again, the best thing we can do is push back and fight it. That's what we do. So in the University of Michigan, when a professor at the University of Michigan was going to let a Jewish student write a recommendation for a Jewish student to study at Tel Aviv University because he belonged to the BDS campaign, what did we do? What did I do? I was on the phone with the president of the University of Michigan that afternoon, and we got that situation turned around. And at UCLA, when they were going to have the Students for Justice in Palestine were going to have their big Megillah, what did we do when they were going to do that? I talked to Gene Block, the chancellor of UCLA. I had breakfast with him, told him you can't do it this way, and he followed ADL's advice and put their little conference on a far corner of campus where no one would see it. And, you know, when we had issues at Emory University, where like these nasty anti-Israel students put a flyer on the door where they knew Jewish kids were living, that they were evicted as if they were, whatever, they're doing some awful mock thing. What happened? I got on the phone with the president a few days later and chewed her out. Because that's what we do. I mean, the good news about ADL, there's a lot of great Jewish organizations out there. And I would say this, you should support all of them. But the thing about ADL is because we've been around for over 100 years, and because we have a kind of, we take a data-driven approach to fighting anti-Semitism. I don't write weirdo press releases. I don't spend all day on Twitter writing crazy thoughts. We are fact-based. We ground our work in evidence. We work with the authorities. Again, elected officials on both sides. That gives us the opportunity to actually get stuff done. And that's what we work on to make these campuses safer for our kids. And much of what we do, by the way, like at Emory University, the University of Michigan, again, I'm not like some personalities, ooh, I got to put this on Facebook. Sometimes the best work happens behind the scenes, quietly, out of the spotlight.
And how do you hear about these incidents? I mean, so I heard about the Emory incident through a friend of mine who had a son that was there. I mean, I guess you need people on the ground to inform you as to these incidents, because as you said, some of them are under the radar and may not necessarily become high profile.
Yeah, I mean, we have pretty good networks. I mean, with 25 offices across the country, we have a big footprint. Oftentimes, it'll be a Jewish faculty member will call us, or the parent of a kid, or a kid themselves. We also work very closely with Hillels. I mean, you know, I have a very good relationship with the head of Hillel International. My offices across the country know all of the Hillels in the different communities. So that's how a lot of this happens. You know, and there's some important things. I mean, I would say, like I said a few minutes ago, I don't really care how you vote. And I will criticize some things that this president does when I disagree with it, but also praise things that he does that I agree with. President Trump's executive order on anti-Semitism was really important. That was specifically about making sure that Jewish students on college campuses get the protection that they need. To give everyone on the webinar a bit of background, there's a civil rights office at the Department of Education. It's been there for decades. They investigate when students' civil rights are violated on college campuses. Black students, I don't know, LGBTQ students, Latino students. Guess how many cases have been brought in defense of Jewish students over the years? Can anybody see that number? That number would be, here's your magic number, 0. That's how many were brought over like 30 years. Is it that there weren't anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses? No, they didn't take it seriously. So this organization, the ADL, worked with AIPAC and wrote legislation that we tried to put through Congress to tackle this issue. And then Congress wouldn't give us the vote. So Jared's office took our legislation, turned it into an executive order, which the president passed, which now says that universities that don't investigate the civil rights claims of Jewish students are at risk of losing their federal funding. That's as it should be. So again, I wasn't looking for attention, but we wrote that legislation. And then if you can look, I guess you can look at my Twitter feed, we promoted it when the White House, when the Trump White House wrote the EO. And I was quoted in the New York Times the next day when it launched. And the funny thing was, the White House eventually, after the EO was signed, they emailed out to their supporters. They emailed out Jared Kushner's op-ed and the ADL's fact sheet on the executive order. So again, whether you're Republicans or Democrat, the only thing I care about is, do you protect the Jewish people? That is my ultimate job description, and I'll work with anyone who will do just that. And I won't work with people who will undermine and harm us. No way.
Very well said. So a couple of minutes left, Jonathan. Let's end on a bit of a lighter note if we can.
Yeah.
For the past several years, ADL has had its Never Is Now conference, which is, I believe, the world's largest annual conference on anti-Semitism and hate. Last year's keynote speaker was Sacha Baron Cohen, who gave an incredible speech that quickly went viral. If you have not seen it, I would definitely recommend you go, because you see another side of Borat in that video. Is it too early to ask you what the plans are for the Never Is Now conference for this year?
Well, that's a good question. I think we're taking suggestions. I think Borat may be busy this year, but I don't know. I mean, we had Sacha Baron Cohen this last year. The year before, we had Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. The year before, we had Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. And the year before that, we had Darren Walker, the head of the Ford Foundation. I mean, we had some really good speakers. I don't know who we'll have this year. I mean, we want CEOs and people who can really straddle between the business world and the nonprofit world. I'm not sure. Like, I thought you were going to ask me, like, am I a Kobe or Shiraz? Which kebab is better? Which chilla kebab do I like the best? Or Chattanooga, which is which is out there too. That's what I thought. But you wanted to know about my speakers. I don't know. I'll tell you what, I would love suggestions. Okay. Stephen, from the IAJF. I would love thoughts about who I should have. So I'm open to whatever anyone on the chat wants to recommend.
Okay, it's a deal.
Yeah, I got to really think about that. I got to think about that.
Okay.
I don't know who.
Well, Jonathan, I will say, really, on behalf of the Iranian Jewish community, as I said at the outset, we take a lot of comfort knowing that you're at the helm of ADL. You've really touched on some incredible things that you're doing, a lot of it under the radar. And so this was really a fantastic opportunity for our community and everyone else listening to really understand some of the impact that ADL has had, and frankly, scary thought as to where we would be without ADL right now.
Well, can I just say one last thing? I would really encourage everyone on who's watching, you should stay involved with IAJF or SHI or whatever your organization is of choice, but get involved with ADL. Get involved with AIPAC. Get involved with Stand With Us. Get involved with these great Jewish organizations working for our community. So I would love to have people involved in ADL. We can use their opportunities to get engaged and to help protect the Jewish people, to help defend the state of Israel, to help fight for a better America. Like, you can do that with us, and we could use the help. But if you don't like ADL, find another organization. I just want to really encourage folks who are watching, flex your muscle. You've got it. And our country and your community needs you and would benefit from your involvement. So this is not a spectator sport. That would be my final thoughts, Stephen. I hope folks will get involved.
That's great, Jonathan, and a perfect way to end this webinar. So once again, thank you for your time, Jonathan. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope you stay safe and you and your family are all safe and healthy.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night and a great summer.